Oh, yeah. Look at what that guy. It's all about that. What have we learned? No.
Oh, thank you very much. I know, it's all, yay, perfect. I'm glad this worked. I'll give you a couple minutes to kind of get Okay, everybody, let's get started. It's 3:30. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see everybody here. We have a couple announcements before we begin with our presentation. The first thing is, thank you for coming today. Please come back again next week. Dr. Adine Fentiman, who has joined the School of Engineering Education, will be presenting, so please come and see her. Are there any announcements from Anexa or others? Any announcements? Okay. And we want to thank David Evenhouse, Richard Elion, Dinesh Radhakrishnan for bringing the snacks today. So thank you for the great juice and cookies and chocolate and fruits. Thank you. Yep. Good job. And if you haven't already, please make sure that you sign the sign-up sheets, and we'll circulate these in case you haven't had a chance to do so. Today's talk will be boiler gasket, and today's speaker is Chantal Levesque-Bristol, who is the director of the Center for Instructional Excellence. So, if you want to just take it away.
Okay, great. Do I need to be mic'd for the boiler cast? Okay, I was just making sure, because sometimes we need those recording tools. Hey, I know some of you. This is cool. I've had some of you in my class, so hey, how are you? I feel like people I know. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming this afternoon and listening to the presentation. I hear that some of you wanted to hear about that, so that's great. And also a little bit about kind of my training to become a professional developer. Is that true, or am I just dreaming this? Like, some people were interested kind of as a career path to do those things. Yes, no, maybe? Sure? Yeah. Okay, well, if it's too long, just, we'll see. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So this goes to advanced. Does it? Yep. Oh, too much. No, we're okay. I'm figuring this out. There we go. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the rest of the time, the impact experience, and really think of it more in terms of active learning experience at Purdue. Because you're in this wonderful building here in Armstrong. When we do visits, we host a lot of visits of faculty from other institutions, even from other countries. We've been working with people from Colombia, the country, coming in and looking at what we do in terms of active learning. We bring them here in Armstrong because we want them to see some of the collaborative classrooms that you have and that you definitely have before the impact program started. So this has been around for a long time at Purdue. It's not that active learning is this new thing, and it's certainly not that impact invented active learning. It's just a formal program on campus to look at student-centered learning. But we have to recognize that there's a lot of student-centered learning going on at Purdue. I'm looking at Heidi. Right now, Heidi is a faculty fellow in the Center for Instructional Excellence. And we're working hard in terms of thinking about how can we recognize and capture and really quantify all of that active learning that's going on at Purdue. So this is centered on the impact program and what we've done and in terms of assessment, but understand that there's a lot of other things going on as well that we want to recognize and kind of work on in terms of faculty development. So why do we do what we do in terms of active learning? Well, it's because of this large lecture experience. It kind of looks like this. I'm sure you've been in one of those before. And that's why we take people to Armstrong, because it doesn't look like this, right? And I always like to point out the fact that in a large classroom, how many of you are teaching? Also, graduate assistant, teaching assistant. You will have the student talking to each other, right? Oops, that's the backward. You have the one sleeping. There's always one, right? These are all of the students that are wondering, what am I doing here? What day are we? Am I in the right class? They're just kind of like, I don't know. I'm trying to keep up. And the question is, what can we really learn at the back of the room if you're trying to hide back there? What are you doing? What are you absorbing? So that's kind of the question that we have when we're trying to do what we do as faculty developer, is to really ultimately think about student learning and how can we foster that. And I was actually talking this morning to some teachers in high school, and you know, they faced sort of the No Child Left Behind and a lot of the standards that they're trying to figure out how to meet those standards, and they're really examining. Well, we are too. I was sharing with them this morning that we faced, to some extent, the same sorts of challenges. We've had to answer the same sorts of questions, right? They've called us, right here, this way, academically adrift and underachieving. Well, that's nice. And, you know, it's been something that in higher education we've not had to really justify before, our existence, why we do what we do. And this is relatively new for us, and we're trying to figure out how to do that, right? So that's what we do in CIE, the Center for Instructional Excellence. This is a center that I direct. We're interested in the large conversation of teaching and learning, very broadly understood. And how can we work together to really increase our capacity to help students learn? Okay? Because we're all passionate about our subject. That's why we're here. And we would like the students to be as passionate as we are about our subject, and we want them to learn. I've never ever met a faculty or an instructor that does not care about their discipline and does not want the students to learn. That's a really common theme. So that's kind of our starting point. So that's what we do. In everything that we do, whether we put a workshop together, or we have a program, or we have impact, ultimately our goal is to help students learn. And we do that through our work with the faculty. So it's a partnership. Just like impact is also a partnership. And it wouldn't work if it was not a partnership. If it was CIE trying to do all this transformation, it wouldn't work. Similarly, the faculty fellows are very important as part of this process. The faculty are the ones driving the process. They're the content expert. We know a lot about pedagogy, and we've studied and researched how to teach and how students learn, but the faculty are the ones that are the experts in their discipline. Okay? And partnership also, more broadly construed, also in terms of other things going on at the university, other ideas that we can get from each other, which is why I like to come here also and look at the Inspire and the Eye-to-Eye lab and what we're doing here. There's a lot of there that are common. So it's a partnership, which is really important to understand. So I'm here speaking about impact, but there's a lot of people involved in making this a success. So we started, and I'll show you a graph in a minute of our progression, but we started in 2010 with 10 courses, part of this redesign. And it was a pilot program at the time. And the provost office, Dale Whitaker, at the time came into a meeting with a group of people, including the director of CIE, somebody from ITAP, and the DLRC, and said, I want to change the culture of teaching and learning at Purdue. Here you go. And he left the room. And this was in the summer, and he wanted this program to be implemented in the fall. So we were a long way from being a Purdue. This is kind of confusing to turn it around. I just technologically compare. We were a long way from being a Purdue move. Definitely. We were a simple pilot program trying to kind of do what we were asked to do, right? So now we have a lot of sort of name recognition on campus. We are Purdue Move. We're part of this initiative, and we're getting money from different places. And we also have now the First in the World grant, which is a spinoff of what Impact is. Why I'm telling you this is because this would not have happened. It would have not gone from a pilot program to where we are now if we had not been able to scientifically examine the program. If we had not done some research and assessment on the program and be able to show evidence of learning, and we would not be where we are. So the scientific evidence behind what we do is very important. So as professional developer, we do study teaching and learning. It's a field. So for those of you who are interested in this discipline, we do that in a very scientific way. Okay, I'm going to try to get this right this time. Here we go. We have worked with faculty to redesign courses in all of the different colleges at Purdue. Engineering definitely is represented to a great extent. Lots of students in engineering. So we partner with engineering very strongly. And this is something that has just not been done to that extent at other institutions. Early in 2000, actually it started with a FIPSI grant in 92, the National Center for Academic Transformation, ANCAT, had this course transformation program that they were putting together and through this FIPSI grant. But what they would do is that they would work with an institution at a time, redesigning a course. For example, psychology, introduction to psychology. And that's the course that they would redesign. And all of the faculty had to come together and agree on one redesign. So it was a very prescriptive model. One redesign, and you have to really show, well, how will this improve grades, reduce DFW rates, and save money? It's very prescriptive. We don't see it around much anymore. I think partly because it was very prescriptive. So the approach that we took with Impact, which fits with the motivational framework that I'll discuss in a minute, is what we use to assess impact, is that it has to be flexible. It has to be flexible because faculty need that flexibility because you're the expert in your field and a one size does not fit all. And to the same extent that students need to feel supported in their learning, their autonomy, faculty, which are people, instructors, which are people, also need to be supported in their autonomy. So there's various ways to get to student-centered learning. This is just a chart to show kind of where we started as a pilot and where we are now and the projection of where we will be by 2017 when the ALC opens. Actually, it has a anybody knows the ALC has been named within the donor more? Nobody? We'll call it the Active Learning Center for now, but it has been. It's what do we do? Well, because it's not a one-size-fits-all, it's a very high-touch program. And Heidi is now participating in this program as a fellow, kind of looking at how we do these transformation. Again, helping us to figure out, well, how do we capture the rest of the active learning that goes on campus? But we provide people. So we have groups of faculty who are working through a redesign of their course, working with groups of support members coming from the different offices that are part of the project. So CIE, ITAP, libraries, and Purdue Extended Campus. We use a lot of online technologies as a way to support those transformations. Oh, I keep doing that. We also give them some financial resource, technology resource, because ICAP is at the table with us thinking and talking about these tools and technologies that can help support the engagement. So one thing to really understand is that the tools and technologies are not producing the learning. They're just supporting the learning. Right? So one thing or one mistake I think that we've made when we look at, we just us, but higher education, when we look at active learning and helping students learn, is that we think of technology as the answer. Oh, well, we just need to find the next new great technology, and that will solve everything. That will help students learn. It's Alex in math, or it's used to be Blackboard, or PowerPoint. That's it. Well, no, that's not it. That's just a way to support the learning. It's a lever. It's a tool. But the tool does not produce the learning. And we found that out through collecting the data. That there are some relationship between some tools and the learning, but it's the way in which you use the tool that is really important in supporting learning. So this is kind of like pause and how I became a professional developer. I kind of stumbled into it. I never meant to be a professional developer. I was a grad student, had no idea that there was such a field as professional development or centers for teaching and learning. So by training, I'm an experimental psychologist. And my dissertation was very experimental. I was in the lab doing work on reaction time, looking at whether we can prime motivation. I wanted to make people motivated without really having them to have to think about being motivated. And I was studying motivation. I was just really interested in why people do what they do. And I got to my first tenure track position, and there were these internal grants that people could get to do research on teaching and learning. I needed money. I'm like, I'll apply for this grant, right? That sounds good. And I talked about motivation in the classroom. I was teaching stats. Nobody likes to take statistics. Everybody hates it. So I was trying to find ways to increase the excitement of my students in my stats classroom. I wrote this grant, not the grant. And it was offered by the Center for Teaching and Learning at that university. So I meet the director of that center, and I will always remember that conversation. He said, you study with DC and Ryan in Rochester, New York, the authors of Self-Determination Theory. I'm like, yeah. It's like, you're a motivation researcher. Have you ever thought about scholarship of teaching and learning? I'm like, what? So it just this whole new world opened up to me, where he talked about this field where you actually research teaching and learning. I'm like, well, that's interesting. And here became this partnership. He brought me to POD, sort of our professional organizational development workshop, and I got hooked. I did get tenure at the same time, so I am a tenured faculty member in psychology. And I continued to dabble, as I called it, in administration, because it allowed me to talk to a greater number of people about what we were doing and the research that I was conducting, and to apply it in many different contexts. But my work as a director, a center director, is very research-driven. We really look at evidence of why we do the things that we do. So I am still a tenured professor. So I am a faculty member as well, and I am a professional developer. So there's different ways to become professional developers. If you want to know more about that, let me know. But there's no career path for professional development. People get to it in many different ways. And you can get to it by having typical faculty record. So I am one of you. I am a faculty member in disguise. Questions about that? Maybe before everyone? Yeah.
Can you tell me, say on a campus of 2,000 students,
Yeah.
what would be, this is a selfish question, how many hours a week might you be dedicating to faculty development on a campus of that size?
If it's your full-time job in a center, or if it's just something that you do part-time?
Some people may expect that it's a part-time in addition to a typical course load.
Mm-hmm. So there's two models for professional development. At a small center in a small university, typically the professional development center will be staffed by two people. One will be an admin assistant, and the other one will be a faculty member that will do 50% time as a professional developer. Now, it won't add up to 100%. These people will probably work 70 hours a week doing their full-time faculty job. They may get a course reduction and running the center, but at that point it's going to look a lot like a workshop. So you'll be leading workshop and you'll be meeting with colleges and deans and associate deans, but it's going to be a lot of work. In centers like ours, where you have a director whose job it is to be there 100% of the time, I'm a faculty member as well. I teach in the fall, so I'm teaching a course right now, but I do that on top of my job at the center. So it's kind of the opposite model. So if you're in a small center where you're doing that 50% of your time, you're a faculty first, and you kind of do that on top of it, then it's going to add up to 150%, not 100%. In the fall, it feels the same way for me. I work 150%. I'm not compensated as a faculty, but my main job is to do the work of the center, except that I have a staff. So if I count the graduate student, you probably have 13 people working in the staff. And it's still not very common to have centers that are that large. So when I go to my professional meetings and I talk about the size of my center, people are very impressed. They're like, you've got 13 people working? We're not as big as Michigan. We're not as big as Ohio State. But 13 says it's just me. So it limits how much you can do. Maybe one more question? I think we have time after for questions also. Okay, so the commonly used redesign that we have fit loosely into those two categories. And I say loosely because we're not prescribing a model. The supplemental model is where you maintain the large lecture halls because for whatever reason, lectures are not going away. But what we're trying to do is make them more student-centered. And you can still do that. Even in a large lecture, I can pose a question, and I can have you think about the answer, then turn to a partner to share your answer, and then, you're like, yeah, we know how to do that. We do that in engineering education all the time. You can make even a very large environment collaborative if you do it well and you really think about what you're doing. But that is just ridiculous. I just can't figure this out. I'm going the wrong way. I'll turn. Okay, so we have those two models, and most of what we're doing actually fits within the supplemental, where we maintain a lot of what the class looks like, but we supplement with engaging activities. So just teaching faculty to do Think, Fair, Share, it may be something that they have never really thought about. Okay. For us, it's sort of like, engineering education, psychologists, oh yeah, we engage, we ask questions. But for others, how many people are trained to become, or to have a training as grad students to become teachers? You're privileged because you have a system here that introduces you to that. You have a lot of hours spent on, okay, this is how we lead a lab, and this is how we engage students. That is not the norm. Most grad students who just graduate and get their first tenure track job will walk into the classroom having no idea how to teach, and they will just teach how they were taught, which were often in large lectures with very little interaction. I'm not switching it anymore. So instead of focusing on a container, this is what the redesign looks like. We focus on student-centered learning. And most of the transformation that are going through the program achieve student-centered learning. It's not 100% because we work with people. We work with faculty who work with students, and you can't control perfectly human beings. So there's variability. How do we define student-centered learning environment? Well, if you think about active learning, there's a lot of different take on active learning, what it is and what it is not. But engagement and student-centered learning, there's actually a theory out there called self-determination theory, which is a motivational theory. These are the authors that I studied with at the University of Rochester, which for over 40 years, this group of researchers, which now is comprised of researchers across probably 100 different countries, have looked at evidence and studied, I'm still doing that, examined the conditions, the things that we can do, how can we set up an environment so that environment leads to greater engagement, greater motivation. And this is what we call student-centered learning for the purpose of our program, in terms of what we measure. Okay? In the terms of the theory, we call it autonomy supportive learning. So autonomy support. We're creating an environment that are autonomy supported. And those environments that are autonomy supported have conditions or have elements in the environment that include some of these elements. There's constructive, positive feedback. There's choices and options that are given. So autonomy does not mean free-for-all or doing whatever you want to do. It means I feel like I have a say in my development. I feel like I can approach this as a scholar. I'm part of this learning process. I have some volition in this process. It's not just about this is what you need to do and end of the story. So we focus on student perceptions. We ask the students what they think. And why do we ask the student what they think? Well, those measures are based on that. They've been validated for many years, so it's not just the measure that Chantal thinks are interesting to use. But we ask the students because the students are the one experiencing the environment. And the students are the one being able to tell us if that environment is meeting their needs, if it's student-centered. Does it make them feel choiceful? Does it make them feel competent? Does it make them feel connected to the material, to others in the class? Are they working as colleagues? So we ask the students. This is some example of the questions. We used to only focus on the learning climate scale as a measure of the extent to which the environment was autonomy supportive. And I'll let you read some of these questions. And if you have heard a little bit about the Gallup-Purdue Index, one of the items is actually almost word-to-word one that is on that metric, which is interesting that this was derived from research, and the Gallup-Purdue Index, if you look at the work of Gallup, was derived through years and years of observation. And one item is very consistent, this one about the interest in the subject, sort of the passion. Okay. Now I have other scale, I'm going to skip this one. We also measure motivation. So as the environment becomes more student-centered, what happens is that the level of motivation of the student goes up. From usually here, extrinsic motivation, I'm here because I have to, this is a required course, to identification. I understand why I'm here. I think this is valuable. This is important. Many times we think about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, but it's not always, intrinsic motivation is not the end-all, be-all. Because intrinsic motivation is about, I'm just enjoying what I do. Well, it's not always fun to be in school. And if you only do the things that you love to do, and it's fun, and you don't do it if it's not fun, you will not graduate, right? So identification is sort of this grit factor. It's not always fun, it's going to be difficult, but it's valuable, it's important, I want to do this. I'm going to be proud when I complete it. So that's a really sort of good focus. I'm going to show you some results in terms of those student perception. And I know it finishes at 4:20, right? Yeah. You want 15 minutes per question, right? So I have like 3 minutes. So we're going to sort of run through that in 5. If I can find the right button. So part of the assessment that we do, and I say we generally, CIA does not do this part, the DLRC, Discovery Learning and Research Center, does that part, is that we look at the faculty perception of the community that we put them through as they learn how to think about teaching and learning, as they do their redesign. And these are on scale from 1 to 7. This was taken early with a few of the cohorts that we had. We interviewed the faculty and also give them some surveys. It's hard to get them after they've completed the program, so that's why some of these numbers are low, and it's a little bit older data, but it's still very consistent. They gain useful ideas from the support team. They plan to use the lessons in other classes, so they start thinking about how they can apply that to other areas.
They think about or learn about specific activities they can incorporate in their course. It adds value. So we get some really good feedback from faculty. One of the most important things that faculty get from the program also is this ability to talk to each other about their challenges when they're teaching. Because there's not a whole lot of opportunities to do that. And what they find also is that no matter what discipline you're coming from, these challenges are very similar. Very, very similar. The faculty will also report, and this is kind of self-report, it's a perception. My students are actually more active. They're not sleeping as much. They have better study habits. I can see that they're actually coming to class more prepared. And they're thinking more. They're talking in class. They seem to be problem-solving more. So this is a sort of self-report that comes out through the interviews. But it's good that they're saying this and not the opposite. I don't know what this is doing. Let's look at the student perspective. And I'm going to run just through some of these slides quickly. This is Ellen, one of the person who did a redesign for us, and she talks about how now the process is very collaborative. But she does things like this. Have students on the floor throwing gummy bears. It's a stats class, and she's measuring, well, how far did the gummy bear jump? And then some jump backward. That's an outlier, so we have -5 centimeters. This is the class that President Mitch Daniel visited. And we actually have a picture of him throwing these pig guys. So it's very interesting. Okay, student perception. What are the students telling us when we give them these surveys, the validated surveys from motivation? Well, the learning climate is those 6 items that I had you read. When the learning climate is perceived to be higher, so what we call more autonomy supportive, more student-centered, then these are correlations, zero-order correlation. Then they feel like they're more choiceful in that environment. They perceive that they're much more competent. They're more connected. They feel more motivated. They report being more motivated. They also report being able to transfer their knowledge to other areas. Learning gains, this is the South, so in the course evaluation, we take the learning outcomes that the faculty members have identified as they go through the program. And we ask the students, to what extent do you think that you actually accomplished or met those learning outcomes? And there's a relationship between how student-centered they believe this environment to be and the learning gains. And also relationship with course grade. Now, this is a small correlation. It is significant. There's a lot of people, so I know what you're saying. Well, okay, this is like small, and that's the only objective measure that you have. The rest is student perception, validated, extremely well-validated student perception, which have been cross-validated. But grade is hard to move. I'm not sure that it's even the most appropriate metric to think about learning, if learning is what we're really interested in. It is what we use most often, but there's a lot of things that go into grade. Does grade really mean learning? We could talk about that for a long time. Okay, I want to show you this one. Oops, no, this one, the next one. So here's pretty striking, and I think I'll stop here after that. In a student-centered environment, so when the students are scoring high on student-centered learning, what happens is that from the beginning to the end of the semester, we see an increase, and this is only looking at perceived competence, in the students, no matter what kind of redesign model we use. We see this increase. So the students feel greater competence as the semester occurs. And you're like, well, okay, that would happen no matter what. Well, no, not necessarily. Because when the environment is not student-centered, and it's not zero, it's less student-centered, below the midpoint, then what happens is that it's a negative effect. There's actually a decrease. The students feel less motivated, significantly less motivated, perceive that they are not competent as much as they thought they were when they started. So when you create an environment that's more controlling, less autonomy supported, their perceptions of their competence drops. And we see that for all of the other metrics that we also collect. Autonomy, knowledge transfer, relatedness. I like last one, and then maybe I'm going to stop for question. This is another way to look at this. Higher knowledge transfer, relatedness, autonomy, competence in a high student-centered environment. And this is the effect for grade. Now, yes, small effect. We have more data. It's stable. But for a student, the difference between a 3.1 or 3.2 and a 2.9 is the difference between continuing into your major or not. So it's a small effect that is very meaningful. So we have that. And then we also have now data coming in from DFW rates, so letter grades of D's, F, and W, that we're partnering with OIRAE to look at that. And we can see decrease in DFW rates from sometimes level of 25%, 30%, down to about 15%. That's about the lowest that we get. No matter what kind of redesign we implement, no matter where they start, 12 to 15% is about the floor effect. But we have this very consistent drop in DFW rates. So that's kind of the impact story. Yes? I'll leave that up there for you to come in with and open it up for Q&A. Questions? Yes?
Have there been extended studies, like you say you have like the metric of the grade right after the course, but has there been extended studies like maybe even a semester beyond the course? Because I feel like, for me personally, I don't get a good perspective about a class until like maybe even a semester afterwards where I'm relating the content to other
Yeah.
so.
Absolutely, and that's something that we're partnering with OIRAE, so the Office of Institutional Research. So we're looking at trajectory of the students. So if you're taking your first class, let's say mechanical engineering, what is the next class that you would take? And whether students who have been in an impact course versus a non-impact course are more likely to continue to perform better. That is under study. We don't have the data like that.
So I wanted to just give you a shout out for talking about identification as that in between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, because particularly for the folks who haven't taught first year students yet, what you'll find is the students come in and they identify, but they may identify with the wrong thing. They may identify with, I don't make mistakes, and I don't get bad grades. Where we're trying to get them to identify as, I am a good student and I am an engineering student, right? So you have to actually work with them to make a transition in how they identify. So they come in identifying, but sometimes it's off and it causes problems, like they freak out the first time they see a B.
Yeah. And it's very, I think what you're bringing up also is just a very good point of creating a student-centered learning environment is also understanding where the students are coming from. Who are they, where they are, what they think they can do, and starting from that point.
You know, that's the other thing is relating to the DFW, because if you look at what it takes to get admitted into Purdue engineering, there's just no way that we should be dealing with DFWs. You know, so what's going on, you know, that's brought you to that point? Because certainly, from just a raw talent standpoint,
Well, there's a couple of different things that are going on that I can just kind of throw out from a motivation perspective. So you have very bright students who have gone through high school without really putting much real effort into their studying. And they come to college and it's harder. I think it's what Matt was just talking about. Like, whoa, you're going to criticize my paper or my, well, I don't know if I want to do that. So then they just give up.
which leads to a D, or they drop out. Second is that, well, Dad is an engineer, and this is what I'm going to pay college for, and you're going to go to Purdue. And motivationally, they may not identify with that at all. They may want to be an architect. But that was never a conversation at the dinner table. What do you want to do, son? It's like, you will do this, and I won't pay for that, but... And they get there, and they're like, you know, really, I don't want to do that for the next 4 years. And they drop. They get into a course, and they get homesick. I mean, there's a lot of... they don't like their roommates. There's some students that are really good at taking standardized tests, but they're not really good at studying. They don't have that grit. And then you have the opposite issue, those that maybe we left out and we didn't admit to Purdue because they didn't score that well on the SATs, but they would have been the hardest worker you had. There's lots of reasons why you get a shift in motivation when you get to college. That's a good, but, oh gosh, I could be talking about that for the rest of the afternoon. Ability does not guarantee success. Ability, smarts, and high criteria, the sort of admission criteria that Purdue has, does not guarantee success. Just like grade is not necessarily a measure of learning. You've had those students, right? You assign grades at the end of the semester. And you encounter the students who get an A. The points add up to an A. And when you look at it, you're like, what? There's no way. How did he get an A? And you go back and you try to find the mistake, and it adds up to an A. No way. Really? And then you go a few more, so, you go down a few more, and then you have one who gets a B. You're like, what? No, not John. John needs something. He's so good. How is he getting a B? No! You start regrading papers and recalibrating everything, right? So in the impact, we talk a lot about that because we call that the misalignment syndrome. Sometimes a redesign is just to connect your learning outcomes with your assessment. What is it that I want my students to learn? And how do I measure that? And sometimes there's a disconnect. But that experience of like, John got a B? What? Susie got an A? What? I could not even... That's the symptom. That's to be like, okay, hang on. Either I am measuring things that I don't care about, or I care about things that I'm not measuring. I need to go back to the drawing. And some of our redesign, that's the most important piece before we introduce any kind of technology. There's time for like 2 questions. 1, 2. Stretch time.
Yeah, so, when instructors adopt a more student-centered learning, and, you had indicated that there's some changes in student motivation, do you see differences in these changes, in the magnitude of these changes between required introductory courses versus, upper division, elective type of courses?
Well, the effect of a student-centered learning environment is going to be positive across the board, but it's going to be more dramatic in a required course that they don't want to take. If you can create, this is how I got interested in professional development. I'm teaching stats. Nobody wants to be there. They all hate it. If I can create an environment that is engaging, I get to be the hero. And the slope is very steep. Now, if it's not good, everybody expects it to be not good, then you're sort of here, you got a floor effect. But in psychology, I joke about that. If you teach human sexuality in psychology, it's full. There's a line, you have to wait to be a 5th-year senior to take human sexuality. I don't want to take those courses. Just start here.